A constitution does not fail when it is ignored. It fails when it continues to function while its purpose quietly changes.
Wow. That is, that's a chilling way to start.
It is, isn't it? It's from Lev Nemotin, PhD, and it just sort of grabs you because we're all trained to look for the big, dramatic failure.
The break, yeah. The moment someone rips up the document on television or, declares it void. The obvious crisis.
Exactly. We look for the fire, the smoke in the sky. But what Nemotin is talking about here is something, it's quieter. It's more like a structural rot.
He calls it functional drift, and I think that's the perfect term for it. The idea that the words on the page, the sacred text that we all revere, can stay exactly the same.
We can still quote it. We can argue about its commas in court.
Right. But the actual machinery, the leverage that text is supposed to give to the people, that can just quietly relocate. It can shift to a place where we can't use it anymore.
And that is the perfect entry point for today. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is a bit of a special one because it's a direct continuation of our last session. This is part 2 of our exploration into Nemotin's The Constitutional Inversion.
So if you're just tuning in now, we really do recommend you go back and listen to part 1. It lays the whole foundation.
It does. But we don't want to leave anyone behind. So for the sake of keeping everyone on the same page, can you give us the 30-second recap? What is this inversion we're talking about?
The core idea is that the fundamental relationship between the people and the government has flipped. It's inverted. The system was designed for the people to be in what we call an offensive posture. They held the real-world leverage. And the government was designed to be defensive, restrained by the Constitution.
A cage, essentially.
A cage, yeah. But over 200 years, because of massive changes in technology, economics, and just the sheer scale of society, that has flipped. The government is now in a permanent, proactive, offensive posture. And the people. We've been pushed into a permanent defensive posture. We're reacting. We're trying to protect ourselves from the very system that's supposed to protect us.
Okay. And in part 1, we used the Second Amendment as our case study, our stress test for that idea.
Right.
We looked at how a right can, in a sense, outlive the structural conditions that gave it meaning.
Right.
But today, we're going much broader. The mission for this deep dive is to take that same inversion framework and apply it rigorously to the rest of the Bill of Rights and even some later amendments.
It's the full structural stress test. We're going to look at the 1st, the 4th, the 5th, 6th, 8th, 10th, all the way up to the 16th and 17th Amendments.
And the central question was what we saw with the Second Amendment just an isolated case?
Mm-hmm.
A one-off?
Yeah.
Or is this a systemic pattern?
Exactly. Is the entire operating system, the Constitution, running on hardware, meaning modern society and technology, that has changed so much that the software, the code itself, just doesn't execute its original commands anymore?
And I really want to be clear before we jump in, because these are sensitive topics. This is not a political conversation. We're not here to argue for one policy or another, left versus right.
No, not at all. This is a mechanical analysis. We're like engineers looking at a machine. We're interested in the physics of power.
Where's the leverage? Who has it? Who's lost it? And where did it go? That's the mission.
I think we're ready.
All right. Let's start with the one everyone thinks they know, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. You know the words.
We all know the words. But Nemotin's argument is that the battlefield has fundamentally changed. We've moved from an era of censorship to an era of gating.
Okay, let's unpack that. Censorship versus gating. What's the real distinction there?
To get it, you have to picture the world it was written for. Back in 1791, back then, repression was, it was simple, it was blunt, it was physical.
You knew when you were being repressed.
Oh, absolutely. If the government didn't like what you were printing, they sent soldiers to your print shop and they smashed your printing press into pieces. They arrested you. They threw you in a dungeon. The censor had a name and a face.
It was a very visible, very direct confrontation. The state versus the individual right there in the town square.
Exactly. But here's the crucial insight from Nemotin that I think most people miss. The primary function of the First Amendment wasn't really about, poetic liberty or the philosophical joy of self-expression.
It wasn't just about being able to say what you feel.
No, it was a tool for political survival.
Yeah.
Its core function was to protect coordination.
Coordination is leverage. We talked about this in part 1, but it's worth repeating.
It is the only real leverage a population has against a concentrated power. If the people cannot talk to each other, discover shared grievances, and then organize a response, they are powerless. They are just a collection of isolated, angry individuals.
So breaking coordination is the first step to neutralizing any opposition.
It's step zero. If you can stop people from coordinating, you've won the game without ever having to fire a shot. So the First Amendment was this brilliant piece of structural design to ensure the government couldn't cut the communication lines. It kept the town square open so people could organize.
Okay, but here's the obvious counterargument you hear constantly today. We have the internet. I can broadcast my thoughts to the entire planet in a second. Isn't coordination easier now than it has ever been in human history?
That's the illusion, isn't it? You can speak your thoughts, you can type them into a box and hit send, but can you actually reach anyone? That is the fundamental shift. Nijmegen argues that the battlefield is no longer the town square. It's now a layered system, a very complex, multi-layered system.
Let's break down those layers. What are we talking about?
Okay, so at the top, you have the platforms themselves. The social media sites, the video hosting sites, that's the new public square. But underneath that, you have payment rails.
Visa, MasterCard, PayPal.
The systems that let you fund an organization, sell merchandise, or even just receive donations. Under that, you have employment structures, your job, your professional reputation.
And credentialing institutions. Universities, professional boards.
The bodies that say you're a legitimate expert or not. And then, maybe the most important layer of all, you have algorithmic distribution, the code that decides what gets seen and what stays invisible.
So gating is the power to control the choke points in that layered system.
Precisely. It's not about stopping you from speaking. It's about ensuring your speech has no velocity. It can't travel. The modern mechanism of suppression isn't about jailing dissidents anymore.
It's much softer.
Much softer. And much more effective. It's about throttling your amplification. It's about getting your account suspended. It's making you unemployable by pressuring your boss. It's getting you debanked.
Or just designating your ideas as misinformation or unsafe.
And once that tag is applied, the algorithms just bury you. Your speech technically still exists somewhere on a server, but for all practical purposes, it's invisible. No one will ever see it unless they go looking for it specifically.
It's the difference between being put in a jail cell and being put in, I don't know, a soundproof room. You can shout all you want.
That's the analogy Nijmegen uses, and it's perfect. He calls it the padded room. The First Amendment in this new environment increasingly protects your right to scream your lungs out inside a padded room.
You are legally free to speak.
Totally free, but the speech can't travel, it can't find like minds, it can't assemble into a coherent group, it cannot translate into real-world organization. And if it can't do that, it can't generate leverage.
And so coordination, the entire point of the amendment, is broken.
It's broken. And here's the really insidious part. The government often doesn't even have to be the one doing it directly.
How does that work?
The ecosystem itself does the work. The platforms, the banks, the HR departments, they become the gatekeepers. And they often do it voluntarily.
Why?
Because their incentives are aligned with the states. It might be risk reduction. They don't want controversy on their platform. It might be fear of future regulation. You know, if we don't clean this up ourselves, the government will come in and do it for us, and we won't like it.
Or it could be access. Government contracts, subsidies.
All of the above. The result is a system of distributed, deniable censorship where no single actor has to take the blame. The government can stand back with clean hands and say, hey, that was a private company's decision. The First Amendment doesn't apply to them.
So the text of the amendment, Congress shall make no law, remains perfectly intact. It hasn't been violated.
Not directly, but the function, the actual purpose of protecting the people's ability to coordinate and check power has just, it's evaporated. You are left structurally neutralized while being told you're legally free.
That is the absolute definition of functional drift. Wow. You feel free, but you have no actual power.
Precisely.
Okay, so if the First Amendment is about the flow of information out from the citizen, the Fourth Amendment is the opposite. It's about the flow of information into the state.
Right. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures.
This was written for what Nijmegen calls the doors and papers era.
Yeah. I mean, think about what a search was in the 18th century. It was a physical act. It was an intrusion. The king's agents had to literally kick down your door, break your locks, enter your private home, and physically rifle through your desk to find your papers.
It was violent. It was obvious. And it was time-consuming.
And expensive. And that cost is crucial. The structural goal of the Fourth Amendment wasn't just about some abstract notion of privacy. It was a very practical economic goal.
It was designed to prevent the creation of cheap dossiers. I love that framing. It's not about feelings, it's about economics.
It is the economic definition of liberty. Think about it. If building a file, a dossier, on a single citizen is incredibly expensive, if it takes manpower, it takes physical risk, it requires getting a specific warrant from a skeptical judge, then the government simply can't do it to everyone.
Power is limited by cost.
Power is always limited by cost. You cannot run a surveillance state if watching one person costs 1,000 man-hours. You can only target the most serious threats.
But what happens when the cost of creating a dossier drops to zero?
Or even goes negative.
What do you mean negative?
Well, what if the citizen pays for the surveillance equipment themselves? What if they carry it in their pocket everywhere they go? What if they willingly generate the data that populates the dossier minute by minute?
And that's where we are now. We've shifted from an era of intrusion to what Moten calls an era of permanent emission.
That's a great term. We live our lives through devices that are constantly emitting data about us, where we are, who we talk to, what we buy, what we read, our heart rate.
It's all just flowing out of us constantly.
And we are carrying the sensors. We paid for the phone. We pay the monthly bill. We built the surveillance system ourselves.
This completely upends the entire concept of a search, doesn't it? Because search used to be an event. It had a start time and a stop time. On Tuesday at 4 p.m., the police searched the house.
Correct. It was a discrete action. But in the modern world, the search is not an event. It's an ambient condition. The collection is happening all the time for everyone as a background process.
The data exists before the suspicion.
That is the critical inversion. In the old world, a suspicion led to a warrant, which led to a search, which hopefully produced evidence.
A linear process.
A linear process with friction at every step. In the new world, the record of everything already exists. The evidence has already been collected, indexed, stored in a massive database, and is just sitting there.
Waiting for a query.
Waiting for a query. So the search is no longer the act of collection. The search is just typing a name into a database field and hitting enter. The cost has dropped to effectively zero.
So when we see lawyers in court today arguing about unreasonable search and seizure, what are they even talking about?
I mean, it feels like they're arguing about the legality of putting an antique lock on a glass door.
That's a powerful image. The lock is there. It functions according to its design, but it's completely irrelevant to the actual security of the room.
It's symbolically present, but it's structurally obsolete. The government doesn't need to kick down your physical door when your entire life is already indexed in the cloud. They don't need to seize your papers from your desk when they can just subpoena Google or Verizon or your bank for records you didn't even know were being kept.
And this brings up the whole legal fiction of consent.
Ah, yes, the I agree button.
Moten is really sharp on this. He says, we're told we consented to all of this because we clicked a box on a terms of service agreement that no human has ever read.
It's a fiction because it treats participation in modern society as if it were a voluntary hobby. But it's not. Can you get a job without a smartphone? Can you open a bank account? Can you travel?
No. You're effectively in exile from the modern world.
So if participation requires submission to this constant record creation, then the consent is coerced. It's not a real choice. And it creates this profound asymmetry where the people are becoming transparent to the state, but the state is becoming more and more opaque to the people.
Which puts us right back in that defensive posture from part one. A population that can be perfectly profiled and predicted at scale is a population that cannot coordinate effectively. It's a population that is inherently on the back foot.
You can't hold any real leverage when every move is known, and you certainly can't hold leverage when the system designed to protect you is one you can't afford to use.
Which is the perfect segue into the justice system, the Fifth, Sixth, and Eighth Amendment.
Due process, right to a speedy trial, right to counsel, protection from cruel and unusual punishment.
This is the bedrock, right? This is what we see on TV. The brilliant lawyer stands up in court and saves the innocent person. It's baked into our cultural DNA.
It is the bedrock. But Moten's argument is that the bedrock is still there, but it's been buried under a mountain of scale and complexity.
Explain that. How does sheer scale break something as fundamental as due process?
Okay, think about the original function of due process. It was designed to be a form of friction. It was meant to make it hard and expensive for the state to take away your life, liberty, or property.
A trial costs money. A jury is a pain to assemble. The prosecutor has to do a lot of work.
Exactly. That cost, that friction, served as a natural limit on the casual use of state power. The king couldn't just lock everyone up because he'd go bankrupt trying to prosecute them all. He had to pick his battles.
But what happens when the system becomes massively complex?
Two things happen. First, the legal code itself explodes. The federal criminal code is thousands of pages long. But then you add the Code of Federal Regulations, which contains hundreds of thousands of regulations, many of which carry criminal penalties.
The famous 3 felonies a day argument, that the average professional unknowingly commits multiple federal crimes every single day just by going to work.
It sounds like an exaggeration, but it's probably not far from the truth. The law is so vast and complex that no single human can possibly know it all. This gives prosecutors almost unlimited discretion to find a crime to charge anyone with if they look hard enough.
Okay, so that's the complexity part. What about the scale part?
The scale creates a massive asymmetry of resources. The state, the Department of Justice, has a nearly infinite budget. They have teams of highly paid lawyers, they have the best forensic experts, they have, most importantly, unlimited time.
And the average citizen has.
The citizen has a mortgage, a car payment, a job they can't afford to lose. Maybe they can scrape together enough money for a lawyer, but can they outlast the federal government in a legal battle that could stretch on for years?
No, of course not.
And this asymmetry creates the phenomenon Nemotin calls process as punishment.
Process as punishment. That sounds terrifying.
It means the process of defending yourself is so financially ruinous, so psychologically draining, and so disruptive to your life that it becomes the punishment itself regardless of the final verdict.
So even if you're completely innocent?
Even if you are 100% innocent and can eventually prove it, can you afford to spend $200,000 on legal fees? Can you put your life on hold for 3 years dealing with depositions and court dates? Can your reputation survive being dragged through the mud? For most people, the answer is no.
So the Sixth Amendment right to a trial becomes, what, a menu item that only the wealthy can order?
It becomes a statistical rounding error. Look at the data. Over 95%, in some jurisdictions it's closer to 98%, of federal criminal cases end in a plea bargain.
They never go to trial.
They never see a jury. Now, does that mean 98% of people are guilty? Or does it mean that the rational choice for almost everyone, guilty or innocent, is to take the deal?
Plea because you must.
It's a survival strategy. Settlement is survival. Fighting for your innocence is ruin. The protections are still formally there on the books, but they are practically conditional on your wealth and your resilience.
And this connects directly to the Eighth Amendment, right? Cruel and unusual punishment.
It does. We tend to think of the Eighth Amendment in very physical terms. Don't put people on the rack, no drawing and quartering, don't be medieval.
Right. It's about preventing physical brutality in the punishment itself.
That was the original context. But Nemotin's argument is that cruelty, like everything else, has modernized. It's become more abstract. It has migrated from the punishment to the process.
Cruelty is process.
It's the idea that the state can utterly destroy a person's life without ever laying a hand on them. Think about it. Indefinite legal limbo, where you're under investigation for years but never charged.
Civil asset forfeiture, where they take all your property before you're even convicted of a crime.
Freezing your bank accounts. Destroying your professional license. The bureaucratic entanglement is a form of modern cruelty. A person can be bankrupted, their family destroyed, their career ended, their reputation shattered, all without ever being found guilty of anything.
The punishment is delivered before the verdict.
The process is the punishment, and it's a form of life-disabling friction. But the Eighth Amendment, as it's currently interpreted, doesn't really see it. It's looking for a whip and a branding iron. It's not looking for a frozen bank account and a 5-year investigation that quietly gets dropped with a 1-sentence letter.
It's administrative cruelty. It's clean, quiet, and deniable.
And because it's deniable, it's so much more dangerous. The state can say, we didn't punish him, we were just following procedure. But the citizen's life is in ruins all the same. They've been neutralized.
Okay. This is all incredibly bleak so far. We have speech that's ineffective, privacy that's illusory, and a justice system that's unaffordable. But all of this is, in a way, the effect. We need to look at the cause, the engine room.
The engines of centralization.
Exactly. The amendments that built and fueled this whole machine, the 10th, the 16th, and the 17th.
These are the gears that made the federal government the overwhelming center of gravity in American life, effectively consuming the power of the states.
Let's start with the 10th, The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people.
This is the heart of federalism, right?
It was supposed to be. Federalism was designed as the primary structural counterbalance in the whole system. The idea was a diffusion of power. If the federal government in Washington got too powerful or tyrannical, the states would be strong enough to push back. Or, as an individual, you could just leave. You could vote with your feet and move to a state that better reflected your values. It was a safety valve.
A critical safety valve. It allowed for genuine political diversity. But Nemotin argues that this has been almost entirely dismantled by a force he calls fiscal gravity.
Fiscal gravity, I like that. It's basically follow the money, but it captures the sense of an irresistible pull.
It's about the direction of the money. Over the 20th century, the federal government became the primary collector of tax revenue. The big money flows to Washington first. Then, Washington redistributes a portion of that money back to the states.
But not for free.
Never for free. It comes with strings attached. It comes in the form of federal grants for highways, for education, for healthcare, for law enforcement.
The classic, nice state you've got here. It'd be a shame if something happened to your highway funding.
Exactly. You want this $1 billion for your roads. Then you have to set your drinking age to 21. You want this education grant. You have to adopt this national curriculum. You want this money for your police. You have to comply with these federal standards.
So the states, over time, become dependent on this federal money to balance their own budgets.
They become addicted to it. And that dependence creates compliance. They become, in effect, administrative extensions of the federal government. They are branch offices, not sovereign entities.
The lines on the map are still there. You still have Texas and California and Florida. They still have their own governments and their own flags.
But functionally, their real autonomy has been hollowed out by financial necessity. If you can't pay your bills without a handout from the feds, then you don't really work for your own citizens anymore. You work for the feds. The 10th Amendment is still there in the text, but the fiscal reality has made it a ghost.
And the rocket fuel for this entire engine of fiscal gravity is the 16th Amendment.
The federal income tax, yes. This, Nemotin argues, is probably the single purest example of the constitutional inversion in action. How so? Before the income tax was ratified in 1913, the federal government was what he calls episodically funded. It ran mostly on tariffs and excise taxes. It was a much smaller, leaner operation. For big projects like a war, it often had to essentially ask the states or wealthy citizens for money.
It had to justify its existence and its expenses in a much more direct way.
Yes. The 16th Amendment changed all of that. It turned the federal government into a permanently fueled machine. It gives the state a direct tap into the economic productivity of every single citizen and every company.
An automatic, never-ending revenue stream.
And that is what allows for the creation of the permanent administrative state. You cannot have massive permanent government bureaucracies. You can't have permanent regulatory agencies overseeing every aspect of life without a massive and automatic source of funding.
It fundamentally changes the relationship between the citizen and the state. You go from being a voluntary funder of a limited government to being a taxable resource for a limitless one.
A resource to be managed and mined. If I have to write a check to the government every year, I feel like I'm the one in charge. If the government takes its share out of my paycheck before I ever even see it,
then they're the ones in charge.
It's a profound psychological and structural shift. Financial control inevitably becomes behavioral control. Once the government has the power to tax income, it gains the power to shape society. It can tax a behavior it dislikes, like smoking, and subsidize a behavior it likes, like buying an electric car. The power to tax becomes the power to socially engineer the population.
Okay, so you have the 10th Amendment neutralized by the money and the 16th providing the money. Then we get to the 17th Amendment, direct election of senators.
Right. And I have to play devil's advocate here because on the surface, this one seems like a clear win for democracy, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
I mean, who could be against it? Instead of some backroom deal in a state legislature, the people get to vote directly for their own senators. More voting is more democracy. How is that a loss of leverage?
This is a classic example of what Nemotin calls the difference between democratic appearance and actual structural leverage. It looks and feels more democratic.
Right.
But you have to look at what was lost. Before the 17th Amendment, senators were chosen by the state legislatures. This meant that a senator's primary loyalty was to the government of their state.
They were an ambassador from the state to the federal government.
A perfect way to put it. They were there to represent the institutional interests of their state as a sovereign entity. If Washington tried to pass a law that encroached on the powers of the states, the very thing the 10th Amendment was supposed to prevent, the senators, who owed their jobs to the state legislatures, would block it.
It was a structural break.
Mm.
A firewall?
It was the state's direct lever inside the federal machine. The 17th Amendment removed that lever. By moving to direct popular election, you turned senators into national politicians.
They became just like members of the House, but with a 6-year term.
Exactly. Their focus shifted from protecting the institution of their state to pleasing the voters, raising money nationally, and becoming sensitive to national media narratives. They became untethered from the specific sovereign interests of their state government.
So the states lost their voice, their direct representation in Washington.
They lost their official ambassadors. So yes, participation increases, every citizen gets a vote, but the structural leverage of the states decreases dramatically. The local buffer that was supposed to stand between the citizen and a powerful national government was dissolved.
It's a recurring pattern we're seeing. It feels like more democracy, but results in less distributed power.
The people are left facing a more unified, more powerful, and more centralized national machine without those intermediary firewalls.
This is a massive shift. And it brings us to what might be the most complex and paradoxical piece of this puzzle, the 14th Amendment.
The hinge.
Name Moten calls it the hinge of the Constitution, and it's a really delicate topic. Because the 14th Amendment is, in many ways, the moral conscience of the modern Constitution. It gave us equal protection, due process applied to the states, birthright citizenship. It corrected some of the original sins of the nation.
Absolutely. And that's why it's a paradox. The 14th Amendment is unique among all the others we've discussed. It doesn't just outlive its conditions. Name Moten says it actively creates new ones.
What does he mean by that?
Well, think about its original and noble purpose: to protect the rights of newly freed slaves against hostile state governments in the South. To do that, it had to fundamentally change the nature of rights. Before the 14th, the Bill of Rights was seen primarily as a set of limits on the federal government.
Congress shall make no law.
Right. The 14th Amendment said, no, these fundamental rights are national guarantees, and they must be protected against infringement by the states as well. And the entity that would do that protecting would be the federal government.
So, in order to enforce rights against the states, the federal government had to get bigger and more powerful.
That is the paradox in a nutshell. To be the guardian of rights, the central power must expand. The federal courts and eventually federal agencies had to be empowered to reach down into the states, into local communities, into private businesses to ensure these rights were being respected.
And once you build that enforcement machinery,
It doesn't just sit idle. It has an institutional imperative to grow and find new missions. The 14th Amendment becomes more than just a shield for rights. It becomes a gateway. It becomes an interpretive lever that allows the federal government to expand its reach into almost any area of life, as long as it does so in the name of protecting someone's rights.
this is what Moten calls the technology of legitimacy.
I think this is one of the most critical insights in the whole analysis. When power expands, but it does so in the name of a noble cause like rights or safety or equality, it appears morally necessary.
And it becomes almost impossible to argue against.
How can you? If you argue against the expansion of the federal agency, you're accused of being against the right that the agency is supposedly protecting. Who wants to be against equal protection? Who wants to argue against safety?
It puts any opponent of centralized power on the defensive.
Morally, instantly. But a structural expansion of power is still a structural expansion of power, no matter how noble its justification. The 14th Amendment, in this sense, allows power to grow without ever having to present itself as a naked power grab. It presents itself as a rescuer, a guardian, and that is the most difficult kind of power to restrain.
Okay, we have covered a huge amount of ground. We've gone from the First Amendment all the way through the Progressive Era and the Civil War amendments. If we step back now and look at the whole picture, what is the synthesis? What are the overarching patterns of this functional drift?
I think you can group the drift into 4 clear categories. The first category is the rights that have become symbol-heavy but leverage-light.
These are the ones that we talk about the most, but have the least mechanical force behind them.
Exactly. That's your First, your Second, and your Fourth Amendments. The text is still there, the patriotic rhetoric is still there, but the actual real-world counterbalance they're supposed to provide is largely gone. You have the right to speak, but you're in the padded room. You have the right to bear arms, but you can't fight a drone army. You have a right to privacy, but you carry the censor in your pocket.
It's a hollowed out right, a beautiful, revered shell, What's the second category?
The second is rights that are conditional on scale. This is where your Fifth and Sixth Amendments live: due process and the right to a trial. These rights still exist, technically, but they're only accessible if you have the resources, the money, and the time to afford them.
They've become luxury goods.
For everyone else, the sheer scale and cost of the system forces you into a plea bargain. The right is conditional on your ability to bear the cost of the process.
Okay, third category.
These are the power-expanding or power-enabling amendments. This is the 14th and the 16th. These are the engines. They're not rights that have weakened. They're amendments that have actively fueled the offensive posture of the centralized state. They provide the money and the moral legitimacy for a permanent, ever-expanding federal government.
And the fourth and final category.
The democratic illusion, that's the 17th Amendment. It gives the appearance of more democracy, more voting, while simultaneously removing a key structural check on centralized power. It's a perfect example of how you can increase citizen participation while decreasing citizen leverage.
When you lay it all out like that,
Yeah.
it's a pretty comprehensive picture of a system that has fundamentally changed its internal mechanics.
And this is what Moten calls the American way of change. It's not a revolution, it's not a coup, there's no dramatic break.
It's continuity with functional drift.
That's the phrase. The Constitution as a document is more revered today than ever. We litigate every word. We have entire legal societies dedicated to its interpretation. And yet its primary mechanical function, to act as a counterbalance to power, has been quietly eroding with every increase in the scale and technological capacity of the system.
It's how a republic can transform into a vast administrative state without ever having a formal revolution. You just keep the old user manual, but you quietly swap out the entire machine it's supposed to describe.
And one day you wake up and wonder why none of the buttons work the way they're supposed to anymore.
So is that it? Is this the point where we just throw up our hands and say, well, it was a good run?
Yeah.
Because this is uncompressed thinking. We can't just admire the problem. If the people are truly in this permanent defensive posture, what does a shift back even look like? Is it even possible?
Moten doesn't think it's game over, but he argues that we have to be brutally honest about the nature of the problem. The question we need to ask is not, are these amendments good or bad? The question is, do we, the people, have a counterbalance?
And if the old counterbalances are gone?
If the physical counterbalance of the militia we discussed in Part 1 is obsolete, and the state-level counterbalance of federalism has been neutralized, then any new counterbalance has to operate in the world we actually live in. It must be, as he puts it, informational, institutional, and decentralized.
Okay, let's get concrete. What would a restoration program based on that idea actually look like? I don't want to leave people just staring into the void here.
Right. It's about updating the mechanisms to match the modern threats. Let's go back to the First Amendment. In today's world, just saying Congress shall make no law is not enough.
Because the threat isn't just Congress.
The threat is deplatforming, specifically financial deplatforming. So a modern restoration of the First Amendment would have to include protections against that. It would mean treating the core payment rails, Visa, MasterCard, the banking system, as common carriers or public utilities.
Meaning they can't deny you service based on your political speech.
Exactly. Because if you can't raise money, if you can't process transactions, you cannot organize. You have no leverage. A modern First Amendment has to ensure that speech can assemble financially and logistically. It requires a Bill of Rights for the digital infrastructure layer.
Okay, that's a big idea. What about the Fourth Amendment? How do you put the genie of the permanent emission back in the bottle?
The lock must match the door. If the threat is ambient, bulk data collection, then the protection has to target that specifically. This means strict legal limits on how long data can be retained. It means a ban on generalized, suspicionless surveillance. And most importantly, it means closing the public-private partnership loophole.
That's the one where the government is forbidden from collecting the data itself, so it just buys it from a private data broker.
It's the biggest end run around the Fourth Amendment that exists today. A restoration program would say, flat out, that the government cannot purchase data that it would be constitutionally forbidden from collecting itself. That single change would force them back toward the expensive dossier model. It would reintroduce friction and cost into surveillance.
And federalism. How do you possibly reverse the pull of fiscal gravity?
The fix has to be fiscal. It can't just be rhetoric. It means fundamentally re-examining the flow of money. If you want states to be genuine laboratories of democracy and sovereign counterweights, you have to seriously consider shifting major tax and spending powers away from Washington and back to the state and local levels.
Let the money be raised and spent closer to home.
If the money stays local, the power stays local. It means cutting the federal strings. Now, that is probably the politically hardest thing to do on this entire list.
The central government never willingly gives up the power of the purse.
Never. But it's the only way to restore federalism as a meaningful structural counterbalance.
And what about the justice system? That huge cost asymmetry problem.
This is my favorite proposal in Nemoten's paper because it's so simple and so powerful. He calls for cost symmetry.
What does that mean?
It means that whatever the state spends prosecuting a citizen, an equal amount must be made available for that citizen's defense.
So if the Department of Justice assigns a team of 5 lawyers and spends $1 million prosecuting you,
then you get $1 million to hire your own team of 5 lawyers. It would change the entire incentive structure of the justice system overnight.
it would reintroduce that friction we talked about. It would force prosecutors to actually weigh the costs and benefits. Is this case really worth $2 million of taxpayer money?
It would make process as punishment prohibitively expensive for the state. It would stop the infinite resource glitch that allows them to crush defendants through sheer financial attrition. It would, for the first time in a long time, actually level the playing field.
The prosecutor would finally have some skin in the game.
Exactly. And finally, there's the language of rights itself, particularly around the 14th Amendment. We have to become sophisticated enough to separate the goal of protecting a right from the mechanism used to do it.
We need to be able to say, I am 100% in favor of this right, but I am deeply skeptical of creating a new, powerful federal bureaucracy to enforce it, because that bureaucracy will take on a life of its own.
That is the maturity that Nemoten is calling for. He calls it regaining the taste for restraint. It's the political wisdom to say no to an expansion of power, even when that power is being offered to you as a gift to solve a problem you care about.
Which brings us to the final and really sobering conclusion of all this.
The conclusion that hangs in the air after you read this is, the Constitution does not need to be violated to be outgrown. It can be functionally relocated piece by piece until it shifts from being a shield for the people into being a wrapper.
A wrapper,
Yeah.
just decorative packaging.
Just decorative packaging for the massive administrative state that operates underneath. The text survives. The function shifts. And the most important task for any citizen, for you, the listener, is just to notice that shift, to learn to see the machine underneath the packaging.
It's the difference between treating the Constitution as a piece of scripture that you just recite and treating it as a mechanism that you have to understand and possess the leverage to operate.
And this stress test we've just run reveals that while the scripture is still intact and beautiful, the mechanism is slipping badly.
Nemoten doesn't end on a note of pure optimism. He leaves us with a dose of doubt and a sliver of hope.
The doubt is very real. And it's that the modern state's advantages, the informational advantage, the financial advantage, the institutional scale, are so profound that any serious attempt at restoration, at decentralizing power, will be framed as dangerous and extremist.
You're fighting against the current of modernity. You're fighting against convenience and safety.
It's a very hard fight. But the hope is that we as a society can rediscover that taste for restraint, that we can mature to the point where we value limiting power more than we value the promises that power makes to us. Because if we don't, then we are simply passengers in a very powerful machine that we no longer control, clutching a user's manual for an engine that was swapped out 50 years ago while we weren't looking.
On that rather heavy note, this has been an essential conversation. We hope this deep dive into part 2 of the constitutional inversion has given all of you a new set of tools, a new lens for looking at the world around you.
It's always about seeing the structure that lies just beneath the surface of the daily noise.
Thanks for listening to Uncompressed Thinking. Keep thinking uncompressed. We'll see you in the next deep dive.
Take care, everyone.